go back and listen to your first patch, and you're going to see the progress that you've made if you actually stick to it. Because there's that concept when you learn something, don't spend 8 hours every single day learning something for like a week, right? Spend 1 hour every day for 1 week. It's going to be much more beneficial for how the brain receives that information.
Well, it's doing reps, right? It's like weightlifting. You know, if you want to bench 300 pounds, you can't try to bench 300 pounds like every day for a month. No, you've got to start off with a couple of 15s and go from there, right?
300 pounds. Yeah, God, man, that's so true.
What is happening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the 52 Qs podcast, your weekly insight into all things production and library music. Whether you're just starting your sync journey or maybe you're ready to pitch to publishers, I promise you, you are in the right place. My name is Dave Croft, and it is so good to be with you today. And if you find this video helpful, then why don't you give it a thumbs up here on YouTube, or maybe a 5-star review on your podcast app, and be sure to subscribe because I talk about production and library music every single week. This episode would not be possible without the support of our amazing friends, family, and neighbor subscribers of 52 Qs, who not only help keep the community alive and thriving, but as member subscribers, they also get access to extra perks like live streams, workshops, hundreds of hours of video archives. They get feedback sessions and opportunities to submit to real music publishers. So if you are ready to take your sync journey up to the next level, then why don't you head over to 52qs.com and join us. It's free to sign up, and memberships start at around $4 a month. Well, it's been a really good week. We are wrapping up week 5? I'm starting to lose track a little bit. Yeah, I think it's week 5 of 2024. And after last week's super productive week, I think I knocked out 3 Qs last week. This week has been actually going a little bit slower. I had a backlog of client work I needed to do. And as I am getting more into the publishing side of things, that there's a whole administrative arm that goes along with that, whether it's writing briefs, replying to publishers, answering emails, fielding questions, and all of those things. So I actually haven't written a ton yet this week. And so that's feeling a little icky. And I've made sure that later in the week that I've kind of blocked off some times just so that, if I find I need time, I will actually put it on my calendar so I don't accidentally double book or get a meeting called or a student coaching session or something like that. And so I've needed to do that. I'm feeling the kind of I don't want to say pressure. It's not really pressure. It's the itch. It's the I need to be writing. And so coming off of a really productive week last week into this week is a little bit of a whiplash, but I still have a cue for you to listen to today. This is called Through Hell and Heartbreak, which is featured in our Expedition 52. And actually, I got my weeks a little mixed up. And last week's cue that I featured, which was called Gin and Tonic, was in this week's Expedition, but Through Hell and Heartbreak was last week. So I got a little mixed up. So if you're watching the Expedition and wondering, hey, where this is, that's what's going on with that. But Through Hell and Heartbreak is the first cue of a series of cues that I'm writing for a Masters movie documentary. And it is a emotional tension type cue. And so let's take a listen to this week's submission for my Expedition 52. This is Through Hell and Heartbreak. So that was Through Hell and Heartbreak, Through Hell and Heartbreak, which was my submission for my Expedition 52 week. And there are a lot of really interesting things. There's thunder drum, and there is a nylon string guitar, and really balancing this tension versus emotion. And if you want to see a breakdown of this cue, including the instrumentation and the mix and all of that, then that is going to be published over for our friends and family subscribers in this week's cue breakdown. You know, I definitely know my way around synths and synthesis. You can't do, music production in a DAW for long without having to interface with some kind of synth, be it Omnisphere or Serum or Alchemy or whatever. But, for me, there's only so far I can go before I kind of start going all blurry-eyed and I get scared, John. I get scared.
Happens,
I wanted to bring one of the experts that I love on YouTube. It is John Audio, who is the synthesis guru, the synth guy. How is it? Is it Mr. Audio, or what is your honorific? How should I address you?
I don't know, man. I just love synths. I love manuals. I stay up late reading manuals. It's relaxing to me. And then you get to try it in the morning, and it usually works out. Sometimes it doesn't. Then you read it again, and it's just fun all over again. But that's kind of, I don't know if that's for everybody.
Yeah, you were the kid that read the instruction manual that came with the video game.
Absolutely, every word.
You didn't just jump in and be like, you know what, the tutorial.
No, like, stop, guys, stop. This is how. Okay, nope. Step 2. We skip step 2. We have to go back. Yeah, that would be me.
I gotta admit, I was like rules and manual. Nope. I just jumped right in and hopefully intuited my way through it. But as a grown up, I can see how I probably could have gotten further in my gaming had I done a little bit of the homework on the front end, because the same spirit of jump in, we'll do it, we'll figure it out,
right?
I probably held me back a little bit, because I do get scared of synths. I'm not going to lie, man.
They're always intimidating the first time you lay eyes on something, especially if it's modular, or if you're patching chords or something. You're like, oh my God, where do I even begin? Right? That's the first kind of thought. What is this?
Yeah, like I love Reason, and one of the reasons I love Reason is it has it looks like gear,
yeah,
right,
flip
on a
it back,
rack,
and
you can flip in the back, and the cables are really impressive. But dude, if I'm being honest, I would flip it around and go, oh, and then flip it right back around, because it freaked me out seeing all those waggling cables. But for somebody like you, who is wired that way, that's not intimidating to you. How did you work through that kind of the fear factor of all of these knobs, all of these buttons, all of these parameters? What do you think is something that if somebody's listening who's like afraid, and somebody out there, not me, somebody out there, yeah, but probably me. How do we get over the fear of our looking at all these synths?
I think it's really starting at the basics, right? So we see all these wires. I guess if we're talking about something modular or something kind of like that, right? We're looking at all these cables, we're looking at all these inputs, outputs. What are these things and what's happening? Really, it starts at the oscillator, right? What's generating sound? This is the starting point of this, and then we take this. Where do we want to put it? Do we want to put it to a filter, which is, for the most part, how most things work? The oscillator comes out, goes into the filter. We do some filter modulation, maybe some cool cutoff stuff, and then from there, do we want to add effects? Do we want to add different modulation? So really, every synth that you should look at, it starts just at the beginning of the oscillators. Where do we want to take these, and where do we want to send these? And each category can be a whole can of worms, right? what waveform do we have? Are we doing any kind of modulation, or are we doing FM? Are we changing this waveform somehow? And then, right, you know what I mean? So it's like every category has its own like subcategories and it kind of tunnels. But at the end of the day, oscillators, filters, modulation, and effects, and generally that's kind of broken down into the easiest components, I guess.
Okay, yeah. Let's actually, because I'm speaking to you, listener or viewer out there. If you are like me, you're like, oh, he's started saying a bunch of words that sounded super sciencey and techie. I want to roll it back even more. So explain the basic flow. Like, what is an oscillator?
Well, I mean, you generate sound, right? You have a thing that kind of just cycles every so often in hertz, right? So like 500 hertz is going to cycle 500 times every second, right? So it's something generating sound. So that's kind of the bare bones, right? And you might ask yourself, what sound is that generating? Like, what is it giving you, right? So you can get a pure tone, a sine wave, or you can get saw waves, which is just a lot of different sine waves up on the series. And that's really the interesting part, I think, right? So every sound is just different sine waves, all smushed kind of together at different pitches, at different phases. And that's what's going to actually make your sound, right? A square wave is just odd harmonics all across the board. And that's something that I've been trying to get across in the synth fundamental thing that I've been working on. I think we're on video 3 at the moment, but it's kind of just a little bit slower pace because I know I talk super fast. I get a lot of crap for that. But yeah, it's kind of just saying, this is the beginning. This is where you start, right? This is what sound is, right? Because if you don't really know what sound is at the end of the day, how are we supposed to kind of control it or manipulate it to do what we want it to do? And then later on comes the effects, right? If something's too dynamic, we compress it. Or if something sounds muddy or it's clashing at something, we EQ it, right? So there's other tools to kind of help carve it. But the initial getting it out of the factory or the bakery, as you, so to speak, because I always see cooking and mixing in audio.
Yeah, you're speaking my language. You're speaking metaphor. You know? I'm with you, buddy. Yep.
It kind of works, right?
All right. So the oscillator, and again, this podcast episode is for those of us who feel intimidated by the whole synthesis process. So the oscillator creates it's a sound generating engine, right. And it could be a waveform, such as a square wave, which is called that because like it looks like a square wave or a triangle wave. And the faster these waveforms repeat or oscillate, then the higher in frequency it goes. And the different wave shapes create different timbres. Am I getting that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, timbre is an interesting topic as well, too. And I think people sometimes listen to timbre, okay, it sounds like this, but really, timbre is a thing where, first off, I'm not a singer, right? There's no secret behind that, but I could sing a C note. You could sing a C note. We're in the same pitch, but you're going to know if it's my voice or if it's your voice. And those overtones that change depending on the sound, that's going to be the different timbre. That's why guitar sounds like a guitar. A violin will sound like a violin. And that's that different timbre, that different texture. Even though it's the same note and the same pitch, it's different. And that's kind of an important thing, I think.
Gotcha. And so the type of synthesis we're talking about right now would be wavetable synthesis. So you have a
technically,
am I saying that right?
Well, so wavetable is basically just a lot of snapshots of individual waveforms, right? If you have kind of either just a basic synthesizer, right, and most of them will either give you options for like a sine wave, a triangle, a saw, a square, whatever, maybe something in between or who knows what. But a wavetable is basically taking a lot of different frames of those cycles and kind of putting them together, and then you can kind of morph in between them. And how those morph is kind of what makes some synthesizers sound a little bit different than others.
Okay, so what is the difference then between a wavetable synth and FM synths and like granular synths? Like let's start with FM synthesis.
So yeah, FM is interesting because I mean you have two waveforms, right? And just think about the basics, right? We have frequency, how fast something moves, right? And then we have modulation. So think change, something's changing something. So we get one waveform and we're modulating its frequency by another one. So if you have a waveform that's like 1,000 hertz cycling back and forth, then you can kind of choose the other waveform. How fast do we want this one to move the pitch of this one? It starts wiggling and moving. It does crazy stuff, especially once it gets into audio rate territory. So something that we can actually hear. Because LFOs, they're way below our hearing, but we can hear their influence. When something's moving really, 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 really fast, and then we use that to modulate the pitch of something different, it's just crazy what we can make with that.
Okay. Now, you and again, I'm just helping those of us who might be getting a little turned around in the terminology.
Sure.
You said LFO.
Right. So
explain what an LFO is, because Oh yeah, I'll let you go.
Yeah, all good. So modulating, changing things, right? So if we want our filters to kind of move back and forth and have some kind of motion in our sound, we're generally going to reach for an LFO. And that's just a waveform that kind of just cycling slowly. Generally, for most intents and purposes, they say it's below our hearing, so below 20 hertz, below 20 cycles a second. So in that case, we can't necessarily hear that tone, but we can hear what that's doing to something else. So if we make that motion of that waveform move a filter cutoff, we can hear that slow motion, even though we can't actually hear the pitch of that waveform. And as soon as we start bringing that up louder or faster and faster, so we can start kind of hearing that tone if we were to listen to it, that's where it gets crazy with frequency modulation, because you're moving something 1,000 times, maybe 2,000, 3,000 times a second, and that's moving something else. And it's just
Gotcha. So
kind of mind-blowing.
LFO stands for, just correct me if I'm wrong, low frequency oscillator.
Correct.
And so it's using a waveform that we just use to create a sound. So if it's a square wave, it sounds like this. If it's a sine wave, it sounds like this.
Right.
At a certain frequency into the human hearing. But if you take that and use it at just maybe 10 cycles per second or per minute or
Sure.
whatever the metric is, then you can use the shape of that waveform, whether it's a square, which is flat and then down and then on, or a sine wave, which is a round curve. You can use that to control other synth parameters.
Right. And an easy way to kind of tie this in, if someone's kind of just watching this and kind of trying to make heads or tails of the whole thing. So we always hear singers, right? We hear them singing notes, and then they have a vibrato that kind of oscillates between the pitch, right? Generally, for most of patches that I'll do, if I want that kind of vibrato, that movement, it's generally going to be somewhere between 6, maybe as low as high 5 hertz or cycles per second. And that's going to be kind of a decent range where that's going to be. You can kind of fiddle with it a little bit, but that's generally the range where you're going to find something like that. So we do hear those slow motions of cycles, and that would be a good case where like, oh, okay, I know what a vibrato on a vocal sounds like.
Gotcha. So if you hear a singer doing a vibrato like, you can tell them, hey, that you're implementing a low frequency oscillator at 5 hertz, and
that's
congratulations.
That's the sound design when you think like you have
soprano.
LFO on your vocal that's moving at 4 hertz per second or 4 hertz. So you're like, okay,
You're LFOing.
exactly.
LFOing.
And that's exactly what we do in synthesis, right? When we modulate some type of pitch or something like that, you're modulating the frequency of that. But in FM, we do that way faster though, so it creates way different sounds.
Okay, all right. So we have FM synthesis, we have wavetable synthesis. What about granular synthesis?
Oh,
I've
granular's
seen
fun.
that. I know that, Omnisphere has a fantastic granular engine, but also things like Farlight and Straylight from Native Instruments. I mean, those are granular synths. So unpack what granular means.
Right. So granular is kind of a step further from just sampling. You having a sample, right? Like a sound that you have. Maybe it's someone singing, or it's some weird noise you made or something like that. You have a sample, you have a slice of audio. And generally when we think about that, we press play and there's the playhead and it kind of moves, right? And then we listen to that sound. Granular, imagine if you have 50 of those and they're all moving at the same time or different times. Some are moving forward, some are moving backwards. And we get this accumulative sound of all these different grains, I guess you would want to call them, right? For the
Which is like a
granular
little
stuff.
snippet of
Yeah.
the sample itself. It's not the full sample, just a teeny tiny
Exactly. And it could be
slice.
like 200 milliseconds, or some of them could be random. And that's the cool part, especially in pigments, right? You can change how long those grains live and die for. Some have a slow merciless death or something like that. That's kind of how I try to approach it. Some are a little bit longer and kind of hang around for a little bit. And you can change the pitch randomly of those. And when you put all this stuff together, it's kind of crazy, but it does eat up your CPU pretty good. I've cooked my computer quite a lot doing some of those patches, but man, there's a whole different dynamic to that type of synthesis. And it's really fun, especially on like a waveform that has a lot of harmonics. It's really rich into all these different things, and it's a huge sound. Then you get these little grains and move them around, and it's really cool.
And create really like kind of complex, dense sound. Like anytime you've heard like a big lush pad, chances are it's probably made with some kind of granular synthesis. Especially,
Oh yeah, dude. It makes it huge. If you have a nice pad even to begin with, and then you sample that, and then put that back into the synth, and put granular on top of that, man, you're in for a good time.
All right. I think I'm getting there, and hopefully listener or viewer, you're getting your brain around it. And the last type of synthesis is modeling synthesis, which I know Reason has just come out with Object, which is their modeling synth. And I know that There are some other modeling synths. Expressive kind of came out with their modeling synth, and the sculpture modeling synth. Can you
for like
tell
you're
us?
talking about like physical modeling kind of stuff like that?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so that's definitely an interesting spot of synthesis, right? Because at the end of the day, we can take a real sound, we can put that in our computers, we can look at that on the spectrum, look at that on an EQ, kind of look at it as far as volume, what's all the envelopes doing. So we're like, okay, this is basically the recipe of trying to recreate a real sound. And a lot of times it sounds very synthy, right? If you go back to a lot of the old analog synths and you dial up a flute or something, it's like, it's trying to be a flute, I get that. But if you heard someone actually play a flute, you can tell the difference, right? So with physical modeling, it's kind of crazy how far things have become, especially with additive synthesis. That's a whole nother can of worms, right? Because you're kind of trying to recreate an exact sound from what reality is. And that to me is fascinating, right? Once you're like, okay, what is this sound? And that's the best way I would say, if someone's trying to actually physically model something, whether they're using one of those kind of synthesizers or they're trying to create something in the real world, is bring that into your computer and look at every single harmonic, look what it's doing, how loud are these harmonics, in what time in the sound, or how loud are these, how quiet are they, what's the envelopes doing, is there any motion going on? And that's kind of the concept of physically modeling something. And it's crazy to me. It's really fun when you get close, but there's a lot of books out there to read if someone's curious about that.
Yeah, it's kind of like the audio equivalent of computer graphics. If you want a picture of a guy walking, we know what that looks like, and that we can kind of spot that, right? So if you're trying to physically model, if you're trying to physically model the sound of the human voice, that would be really, really tough. But physically modeling other things like percussion instruments, which have significantly fewer variables which impact the sound. I mean, if you hit a cowbell, there's only so many ways that's going to be subtly different. All right. Okay. So if somebody is like, okay, I think I'm ready. I think I'm ready to go into the deep ocean and just into the shallow end, maybe with our we can still see the shore.
Right.
Where would you encourage somebody to start? Like my Fisher Price Duplo block synth.
Okay.
Where would you encourage folks to start? Because there's a lot out there. There's obviously like,
oh my God,
the Omnispheres and even like Serum can get a little bit intense.
Sure.
But is there a synth that you would recommend somebody who is willing to brave these waters?
That's an interesting question, because there's two different kinds of people I think out there that approach that question. There's people on one side that say, pick one synth and just do that and don't look at anything else. And I remember reading those kind of comments. I'm like, oh, but that's weird. I can't do that. That's not me, right? I would have to go to every single one, because I'd play with one for like a month, and then I'd be like, okay, I'm bored of this. I'd go to the next one. I'm bored of this after a month. And then I'd cycle around with like the same 6 or 7 synths and just and they would always be fresh every single time. And I think that's kind of an important thing, right? This kind of excitement, this novelty of looking at these different synthesizers. And then you don't burn yourself out as much. So that's my side. That might not be somebody else's. But if you're the other kind, I would say definitely start off with a synth that has a good interface. And for me, I would say that's probably going to be Pigments, because you can see so many different modulations going on. You can see everything what's going on. Hopefully your computer's good enough for it, first off. But yeah, you have all the different kinds of synthesis as well. So if you want to just focus on subtractive, just use the analog, right? Just kind of stick there for a while, look at the different waveforms and see how you can make something out of that. Once you kind of feel like you're growing a little bit further out of that, you can maybe go into the sample engine, or maybe you can go into the harmonic engine, something like that, or the wavetable if that's something that you're kind of getting into. Because wavetable has been pretty big for a long time now. And that's kind of the cool part of that. It's difficult, man, because there's so much to learn in the beginning. It's just, it almost feels like you'll never make heads or tails of it.
Well, part of it is kind of like, once you learn how to play a flute, you can kind of play a saxophone, and you can kind of get your brain around, right? Like once you know the fingerings, then it's just a matter of translating it to a different instrument, or learning a DAW. Like once you understand kind of DAW workflow, going from Logic to Ableton to Pro Tools to FL Studio, it's just a matter of learning the ins and outs of that specific thing. Right. So I would imagine once you kind of get your brain around the synthesis flow. Yes,
that's the most important part, really. It's just, like you said, the flow. Like you have to learn, what do oscillators do? What do they sound like? What does this saw wave sound like? Like the sound of a saw wave is so burned in my head that I just know exactly what it sounds like. And it's a good way to test different headphones or speakers on a certain synth. If I load up Diva and I play a saw wave, I'm like, okay, interesting, right? You kind of just know what to expect, and that's kind of the spot you have to get to. And on top of that, the sounds different filters sound like, right? You're going to have way different sounds from like a ladder filter or maybe like a diode or, I mean, there's so many different kinds that you can kind of play with. People model the same type of filters slightly differently, right? Some people like the fact on ladder filters, you crank the resonance and you lose the low end. Some people like that. You know, it all depends on what you're trying to go for. And then there's the effects, and that's a whole nother can of worms. So if at first it seems so overwhelming, right? How do we bring this in? But just the slow steps every single day. There's an exercise I try to tell people to do. Pick a synth that you really like whether it's Serum, Pigments, who knows, whatever synth of choice you have. And if you want to get to learn this thing, take a month's time every single day, maybe set aside an hour's time, and make 3 different patches. And
like create your own patch.
Absolutely. They don't have to be good. They don't have to be great, but you have to make them and you have to save them into a folder every single day and try to use a different parameter. You know, if you don't want to make the same super saw every single day, right? You kind of want to branch out a little bit, maybe see what this effect does or what that does. So 3 patches every single day. Once you get to the last day of that month, go back and listen to your first patch and you're going to see the progress that you've made if you actually stick to it. Because there's that concept when you learn something, don't spend 8 hours every single day learning something for like a week, right? Spend 1 hour every day for 1 week. It's going to be much more beneficial for how the brain receives that information.
Well, it's doing reps, right? It's like weightlifting. You know, if you want to bench 300 pounds, you can't try to bench 300 pounds like every day for a month. No, you've got to start off with a couple of 15s and go from there, right?
300 pounds. Yeah, God, man, that's so true. You can't expect to play guitar for 8 hours a day for 1 week. Whereas you could spend 1 hour every single day that week, and you're going to learn so much more than that.
No, I totally get that. All right, so your YouTube channel, which I really like, and I've subbed, and it's fantastic, and we're going to circle back to your YouTube channel, but there are a handful of synths that you have gravitated towards that show up, and so I want to kind of go through the Mount Rushmore of synths that as I see them on your YouTube channel, and I'd love for you to kind of tell us a little bit about each synth, maybe what are its strengths, maybe what are some of the things to watch out for, and who each of these synths is probably for. And I want to start with Diva. Diva by, is that Spectrasonics?
No, Yuhi.
Yuhi, sorry. So my apologies, Yuhi. So tell us a little bit about Diva, what it does, and who it's probably best for.
So, oh man, so this is a very, very special synth. This is one of the synths that in the sea of synthesizers, so many synths, it's the one that you really want to have because it covers the ground of just the emulation of old analog, right? There's a lot of synthesizers out there that'll claim, we sound like this, we modeled this synthesizer, and maybe that's true, but there's none of them that sound like Diva, right? And the charm of this is that it's not just we're modeling just like a Mini Moog or a Jupiter or something like that. They modeled the individual modules, right? So there's like the oscillators of the Moog, then you have like a filter of the MS-20, and you can kind of see what that sounds like because we wouldn't really know what that would sound like either or otherwise, right? And it just sounds good, right? There's something that they do. Every single note that you press is going to be slightly a little bit different, and the argument can be made, right? We can do that in any other synth. It's like, sure, you could, but you don't have to in Diva. It's just set up that way. And it sounds huge. It just sounds rich. There's something about how they make that synthesizer, but it does come with a little extra CPU cost. But they did do the multi-core feature on there to kind of help with that. Right. But it's good, man.
It's emulating classic synths, classic analog synths.
Yeah, and that's the cool part. Like I'm a big fan of the MS-20 from Korg, and that filter is really, really good. And then you have the oscillators of that, and then there's little special stuff in that one. So if you were to dial up the MS-20 oscillators, and if you put the volume of the oscillators a little bit lower, maybe like on 1 or 2, and then you start cranking the peak, not resonance, but the peak, right, and do some filter cutoffs, you're going to get a much different tonality than you would have had in the oscillators full volume. So there's those little subtleties in there that's really cool about it.
Okay, all right. So that's Diva. Tell us about Hive or Hive 2.
Oh man, another love of mine. So that's also by Yuhi. And the reason, dude, I use that one almost as much or if not more than Pigments. And there's a couple of reasons. One, it sounds very, very good. Low CPU, so I can have 100 instances of Hive in my session, right? If I'm listening back, I'm like, okay, maybe I need like a whoosh, whoosh, bing, 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 some weird, crazy sound. I'm like, okay, load up Hive, do the modulation, add it, it's done, and I can keep continuing on with the track. Because there's 2 hats that we wear, right? There's the producing hat, writing a track, and there's like, oh, now I have to sound design, right? And so Hive kind of narrows that gap. So you still have the energy and the excitement to keep writing your track while you still throw something cool inside your track, and you listen to it back, and then that's in there, and then you kind of feed off that, and you feel more inspired, and it kind of just, it rolls off, and everything's right on the front page. It's easy to access. You're not going to be like in menus and menus and menus and stuff like that. If you want to have some crazy features, there are advanced stuff under the hood, right? There's hidden features all over Hive. So you could go a little bit deeper if you want to, but it's quick, it sounds good, and it's super CPU efficient. That's really the main takeaway, I think.
Gotcha. And it's not like Diva in that it is an emulator. It's more of a kind of for a modern sounds and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it does have a couple synth engines, right? You have like the clean, the normal, and then the dirty, which changes the sound. Like you have a diode filter for the dirty, and then you have different. It's almost like three synthesizers in one, I guess you could say. You can make a whole patch in a certain synth engine, and then think, what does this sound like in dirty? And you switch it over, like, oh, that's kind of cool. So you kind of have three patches every time you make one, if that makes any sense.
Okay, yeah. As far as beginner friendly, and let's back up to Diva, is on a scale of, I don't know, 1 to 3, how beginner friendly is Diva, with 1 being totally beginner friendly and 3 being probably more advanced?
That's an interesting one, because so Diva, when you first kind of look at it, you'd think, okay, this seems pretty simple. And like once you learn it and you kind of get in your brain, like, oh yeah, this thing is almost too simplistic, but that's kind of the charm of it. But when you first approaching it, you're like, oh my God, what is this? And I hear that a lot of people are like, dude, I've been trying to use Diva for a while, and like I don't get some of these settings, and they kind of feel like they get stuck, but they went through the whole course of it and they're like, okay, now I feel like I'm comfortable with it. And I bet now they look at Diva with different eyes. They say, oh, what was I so scared about? Because it is simplistic at the end of the day, but once you kind of get down to it, you don't really see the modulations as much. It's not as modern UI as we have now, right?
Yeah, I guess I should probably, for me, how I define beginner friendly is in a couple of things. First of all, is the UI. Does the UI make your eyes bleed just on opening? That's a big one. I'm looking at you like massive. Every time I open up massive, I'm like, oh. And close. Yeah. I get totally overwhelmed. I get that. Also with Zebra. We'll come back to Zebra.
Oh,
here.
Yeah.
But when you open up like Omnisphere, for example, it's like, oh, I know Omnisphere. Clean. You start, it's super clean. And so there's the kind of the overall UI and the preset support, like beginner friendly preset. Okay. So Hive, how beginner friendly would that be based off of, UI and preset support?
I think it's a little bit more difficult than I would say some of the more, I don't want to say modern, but UE does interfaces differently, right? Like if you're a beginner and you're approaching it, it kind of might not make sense at first, but then once you kind of break through that barrier and it starts to make sense and you feel comfortable, you're like, okay, I feel comfortable. I think that they did it right. You know what I mean? Okay. It's kind of one of those kind of aspects, I guess.
Yep. All right. Next synth, Serum.
Yes.
What does Serum do really, really well? What are some of the challenges, and how beginner friendly would you say it is?
See, what's funny about that's one of the first courses I started was using Serum, kind of showing just sound design, because it was just so good at showing that, right? Mm-hmm. So when Serum came on the market, there was really Massive that was competing with it. I mean, that was kind of like the main thing. And the Serum comes out and it's like, oh, okay, the game's changed. So everybody kind of gravitated towards Serum, and for good reason, right? It sounded great, and it still does. It's still good to this day. But it's easy to use, and we can see what we're doing. If we want to see this modulation ring going on the filter cutoff, it's easy to change an LFO like we're talking about earlier, right? So those oscillate positive and negative for we don't want our filter to go positive and negative. We just want to go positive, right? We just want to kind of go one direction. It's easy to change that. It's a little quick command key and click on the mouse and boom, it changes that. And it was just set up in a way that I think Steve saw this as well. He's like, this is kind of how sound design should be approached. Mm-hmm. And a lot of other manufacturers kind of saw, hey, that's a good idea, Steve. And they kind of almost adapted that kind of modulation workflow because it works and it's great. I mean, Serum's still huge. Yeah.
And Serum, I have Serum because I bought it like rent to own. And so that's really kind of forward thinking, I think, retail strategy.
It's good. It was like $10 a month or something like that. And
Yep. And then I got it through Splice. And so I didn't use it for a long time. I paused it and then I picked it back up later. And I paid full price. It wasn't on a discount, but I also basically had an interest-free loan.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, might as well.
All right. Next up, you've mentioned this synth a couple of times, Pigments. And Pigments is from Arturia.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, man, that synth has struck a chord in my heart that I don't think any other one has really. I mean, from us, depending on what we're doing, right? But that one is just a workhorse. It covers every single ground. And when that thing came out, I was like, okay, this looks really cool. It's very pigmenty, right? It's very bright colors. And that's when thing kind of brings you in. There's all these colors and modulation, the windows. I'm like, this is interesting. And I bought it instantly. And I got this and I was like, oh, this is really cool. Read the manual like front to back a lot, right? Read it again, read it again, read it again. And it does so much. And then they came out with 2 and then 3 and then 3.5 and then now we're on 4. And it's insane how much they've packed into this synthesizer. It kind of just does everything that you really want it to do. And the interface is probably, in my opinion, the best one out on the market right now. It's just so easy to drag and drop. And the cool thing, you can even drag from a modulator onto a destination. And before you even let go, you can see what it's already doing to kind of like hover over, oh, it's doing that. It's moving the cutoff. Let's move it on this. Before you even like commit to it.
So you can kind of try it.
Yeah, there's all those weird, cool little features of Pigments right there. It sounds so good.
That's a feature I didn't know I needed, let alone wanted. And
I know, right? And you're like,
yeah, that's
interesting. Load it up now. Let's see. Let's check this. Oh, whoa, that's kind of cool. Yeah,
very good. So on a scale of 1 to 3, beginner, intermediate, or advanced, how beginner friendly would you say Pigments is?
I'd say very beginner friendly. That's one of those ones where I don't know how they came up with this design, but if you're a beginner and you pick it up, you can see, oh, this kind of makes sense. And then if you feel like you're an advanced sound designer, you're like, this is pretty cool because it does have all the advanced stuff I want. So they've covered the ground from beginner to intermediate to advanced, I would say. And then you can kind of get into later stuff if you want to, way deep down the road. You can load a VCV rack and go nuts. But I mean, that's a whole nother story.
Yeah. Now, obviously, we could go in and we could talk for a whole other hour just going down every synth made. And I want to mention 2 more.
Yeah.
First of all, Zebra. Or Zebra if you're in the UK.
Yeah.
Zebra, who do you think is really that is for? What are some of its strengths? What are some of its challenges? And how beginner friendly would it be?
Well, I guess the challenges are the interface because everyone looks at it and they're like, oh my God, what is this? You got this big grid in the center with all these, it looks like an Excel sheet. And you're like, oh, what is happening here, right?
Are you talking about me? Because that is exactly. I'm like, what do I do?
Right.
I load up a patch and it looks like a flow chart for a chemistry lab.
Good luck making sense out of that.
Yep,
right. Just wires going to that one. Yeah,
yep, exactly.
No, I get it. Yeah, that's the hard part, I guess, about that one. But with what it can do, it kind of does require that complexity. So one thing that's really cool about that one is the HZ version, right? So that they made for Hans Zimmer. Right, that version is way cool because they added the Diva features in there. There's like in-lane compressors, which is really nice. And then Plugmon made his own version of his skins. I don't know how that guy makes this, but he makes these interfaces a little bit more approachable, in my opinion. So that's kind of a little bit easier to approach Zebra. And that's a synth for someone who probably has spent a while in sound design or synthesizers, and you're kind of outgrowing certain things for certain occasions. And then you go to Zebra and you say, like, it is a workshop, right? It is a huge playground, I guess, of sound design.
Yeah.
You have all these different modules and lanes. Like the course I finished, man, I think it came up to like 38 videos, which was a lot. I was like, holy crap, this is a lot to cover. There's every little module in there, what all the stuff in the modules do. You have a lot of filters. I mean, just all the different modules. There's different filter modules with different filters inside those modules. And it gets super in depth, but you can do almost anything and it sounds really good. That's the thing with Yuhi. All of their synthesizers, there's something about them. If you load one up, you put up a saw wave, maybe put some unison on, and you're like, holy crap. Yeah. And then how they make filters, it's mind blowing.
Yeah, and I have found, Zebra is relatively lightweight,
Yeah, oddly enough, yes, it is.
Yeah, for what it does, especially compared to like Omnisphere, which can, really start choking it down.
Oh, yeah.
And as much as I want to talk about Omnisphere, the last one I want to talk about is Vital. Vital is unique on our list because Vital is a free download, right? Isn't Vital free or
it's free. You can purchase the full version, which it doesn't really change the features. You get presets and different other stuff with it, which is what I did because I love supporting this stuff. Like for Serum, for example, right? Steve that made this, and you have Matt that makes Vital, and it's cool to support that, right? And it's a huge undertaking to build a synthesizer, right? I've done a little bit of coding and a little bit of trying to get a plugin off the ground, and man, it is a lot. It's a lot of work, and that's just like a gain plugin for me to make an entire synthesizer with different oscillators, the math behind that, the filters. How you have the math for the filters? I have like filter books and books and books, and it gets crazy. It looks like, I don't know, like inscriptions with math, and it looks crazy, man. It's hard to make sense or heads or tails of that. So if someone makes that on themselves, man, that's impressive. So
that's right. Yeah, I'm going to let them do that. That is not mine to do.
Absolutely, and the interface is great. One thing that I think is really cool about that is the high FPS, right? The frames move so quickly in Vital that it's kind of almost pleasing to look at. And And it's similar to the structure, like how Serum looks, right? You have like the similar tabs at the top, the oscillators, right? And then they go into the filter, which is kind of just basic synthesis in general, but it's an interface that I think is approachable for beginners. So if someone's like, I want to try out sound design, I kind of want to dabble on my feet, I don't really want to spend money at the moment, a lot of people will kind of gravitate towards that, right? So you don't have to pay for it. But even now, there's a lot of free stuff out there. But there's a lot of support for Vital too. It took on a huge user base for a while. So, I mean, there's a lot of presets, a lot of content, a lot of people teaching it, a lot of people showing how to use it.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I think, if you're trying to decide kind of what is going to be my synth, or at least where is my yard of synths that I want to use. Like for me, it's Omnisphere, it's Zebra, and it's a little bit of Serum, just because I didn't want to go too far, and I really wanted to kind of pour into a handful of synths. But one of the determining factors for me was obviously ease of use.
Yes.
Stability of the company.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how supported is it? I mean, you go type into YouTube, like, make a pad in Omnisphere, you're going to get a ton of things. You make a wobble bass in Serum, you're going to get tons of support. Now,
oh my God, yes.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Go back 10 years and that and Massive and that kind of thing. But the third party support, whether it's YouTube channels or whether it's presets. And
yes.
I want to change gears a little bit and talk about presets, because I know that you make your own presets.
Yes.
And we'll have links to your store and everything. And again, your YouTube channel is fantastic. You're kind of giving it all away out there on YouTube.
Yeah, I try to do a half and half, right? I don't like holding everything behind a paywall, right? So every week, it's like people will say, okay, what synth do we want to use? And all these patches are free, absolutely. Like you can use them if you want. You could do whatever you want with them, right? But you can also learn from them. That's kind of the goal, right? So if someone's like following along, and this happens quite often, actually, they're like, I followed along and it doesn't sound the same. So there's the link to the actual preset so they can look at those side by side and like, oh, okay, maybe this knob was like 0.2 off or something, which could change everything, right? So that's another reason to be out there. And then the preset packs, the thing that my argument for the whole thing is that what bothered me is when I would be searching for different packs of different stuff that I would like, because I've done that as well, right? Before I was like, okay, I can make what I want to make, I would go search out for different things, and that's fine. But the problem I ran into was, here's this pack, the whatever genre, whatever style it is, here's like 300, 200, whatever is presets. I'm like, oh, wow, this is almost all I need. And then you go through them once you buy it and you're like, okay, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks. Oh, that one's cool. Also favorite that one. And at the end of the day, it's like I have 5 or 6 maybe presets that I like. And how many times can you use the same preset in a song?
Right.
Or in an album or something like that, right?
Right.
So that was kind of the argument.
For me, it was the preset pack, and if you're watching or listening, you know what I'm about to say. I had Omnisphere because I know that's like an industry standard,
right,
and everybody should have it. And so it is great, but it didn't click for me, and I'm like, a little bit of buyer's remorse, and I'm like,
yeah, that's a thing. It happens.
$500, but it wasn't until I got Matt Bowdler's presets for Omnisphere that I realized, this is what can be done with this, because Matt's one of the synth programmers that has worked with Hans Zimmer, like creating some of those Zebra patches for Mr. Zimmer. And so not only were they good packs, but I used the packs because with all these presets, you can just kind of flip around the back and look at the parameters and see, here's how he routed his modulation, here's how he routed his effects, and here's how he used delays and all of that, and kind of used it as a master class to learn how to do this on my own. Now, that's the
best way to learn, I think, sometimes, man. Because you see in real life that's on the job learning right there.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of reverse engineering, and I don't really have it in me to release 400 Omnisphere patches. I get tired just thinking about it. But using these presets not only to inspire you and to use in your own cues, but to kind of learn what can really be done by an expert like you who knows the synth inside and out.
That's kind of why I love Pigment so much, right? There's so many presets and supports for it. And then you find something you like, and it's so easy to see what's going on, right? If you're looking at a modular synth, good luck trying to deconstruct that, right? You're like, okay, this cable, you're like, oh my God. And then like halfway through it, you're like, oh, I was looking at the wrong cable. You have to start all over again. So it's kind of discouraging.
Yeah,
right?
or if they bring in their own samples, you know what I mean? Like I sampled this crane that was outside of my office building in downtown New York. You're like, okay, that's great, but
right.
I don't, which is one of the reasons. Yeah, one of the things I love about Matt's presets is it's all stock Omnisphere, which means the installs are super light. But yeah, using presets to inspire and to kind of reverse engineer and learn. And for your preset packs, and again, we're going to have a link to that. It is John Audio, jonaudio.gumroad.com. So if you want to help support John, and obviously go and subscribe to his channel. What are you doing?
Come on.
Did your kind of preset packs come out of your daily, make 3 presets every single day, and at the end of a month you're like, hey, I've
actually
got some presets I can sell.
I haven't really done that for a while now. That's when I really started to learn different synthesizers that I just really wanted to know every little feature about. What I try to do, and it's kind of, if anybody's made preset packs out there, you'll kind of know this struggle, right? So what do you make it about? What's the theme, right? Because you don't want to have just like, here's cool 10 sounds I made in my basement at 2 a.m. Like
that'll be $3.
Cool. Yeah, like, and how do you like tell people what it is, right? So you have to have some kind of theme to it, right? Like one of the ones I did, I watched Silent Hill. And I'm like, oh man, I like this movie. I like the soundtrack. So I recreated most of the sounds that are in that movie. Mm-hmm. And it's Silent Chills, by the way, we have to change things up a little bit. But yeah, it was inspired from that movie. And then, yeah, you kind of have to have this theme. And that's the hard part, is sticking to this idea of what this is supposed to be like. They have to all be good, right? I can't, with a good conscience, sleep at night knowing, here's like 500 presets that like I just made 20 from one and just changed a few knobs and resaved it as another one, because I've caught people doing that, and that's dishonest, right? And they'll have like one sound and like, okay, this is, I don't know, crazy pad 1, and then they like change the filter a little bit, maybe change the envelope of the amplitude, save as number 2. I'm like, that you can't do that. Come on.
Well, yeah, you'll get the sale once. You won't get the sale
right?
twice.
That's the thing. And all the macros have to actually work. They have to have a purpose behind them, right? You can't just have empty macros.
Yeah. Now macros, just again, I'm just calling out terminology. Macros would be using one knob or one interface option or element to control multiple things at once. Correct?
Yeah. So if you have, for example, like 4 or 5 different effects on something, and you're like, I want a knob just to kind of have a wet and dry of everything, right? So no effects, all effects, you can easily do that. And that's generally what I do for my patches, right? If they're like, I like the sound, but I don't like the delays or the effects or something, I just want to like use my own stuff, you can just turn the knob off and use your own effects, which makes it so much easier instead of like going through, okay, I have to deconstruct, turn that off. Because some people might not know where to look. So that's why the knobs are right on the front of the interface. You can just turn them off, or just have all these different parameters moving at once, have 2 filter cutoffs move that also like pushes FM at the same time, and that's on one knob. So, I mean,
gotcha.
That's kind of where those come from. There should be a purpose and intention behind those.
Yeah, and I know that was something that Massive did early. I mean, that was kind of one of its early claims to fame was, hey, we have macros and we have these macro buttons and you can control multiple parameters at once. But then it got kind of lapped by a bunch of other synths that came out afterwards.
Yes, it did. Yeah, and those macros, use them. They're there for a reason. Yeah. I mean, I just wish there's more in Pigments. That's my only kind of like downside. I'm like, I wish there was like 8 or 16 or something like that.
The Pigments, what version are they on? 4?
4 right now, yeah.
Yep, Pigments 5. It's going to happen.
I want that so bad.
I'm speaking it into existence.
I hope so.
Well, like I mentioned, John has a stellar YouTube channel, and if you're watching this right now and you also subscribe to John, you probably didn't know what he looked like. I know I didn't.
Surprise!
And I just want to clarify, you don't not show your face on your YouTube channel because you're not in the witness protection program or anything like that. You have a reason for not showing your face, right?
Yeah, there's a couple reasons. There's also, I don't find a reason to have my face covering a certain parameter. The parameter is more important than my face at the end of the day, right? We're not going to look, hey, we're going to watch how to do this, I guess, bass wobble, for example, right? And see what John looks like. That's kind of right. I mean, here you go. But I mean, at the end of the day, when I would watch different videos and tutorials, when I was learning a certain thing, there's a lot of times where this guy's like, yeah, maybe put your mouse over here and go to this menu. And the mouse goes right underneath his face. I'm like, God dang it, dude.
That is not helping.
Yeah. And like, I'm like, okay. And I'm looking in the comments and people are like, I can't see it because of his face. I'm like, God, that's why is your face there?
Yeah.
Sometimes people do it good and that's fine, but it's just, I don't know, to me, it's distracting. It's another thing to think about. Is my hair good? Is the lighting good? I'm like, it's about sound. It's about audio. It's about synths, right? It's not about John's face.
No, I'm with you. When I do all my live streams and everything, especially because I do more long form teaching, being able to be on camera is pretty important. And, I've spent enough money on cameras and lights, but I have set up my Logic template so that the camera fits in a spot in the UI that doesn't cover up anything. And even if I do need to, I have a Stream Deck and I can take my camera away. And I've done that. Like if I have to go to the far left corner, like go to File, Preferences, then I'll actually turn my camera off. But I think
that's cool. You're conscious about that, though. I mean, a lot of people aren't. It's just like, what are we doing, right?
Well, no, I've just like you. I've watched those videos. I'm like, dude, your face is in the way, especially if it's like lower right hand corner. It's like you are covering up the thing that I'm here to see.
Yeah.
And delete or unsubscribe or whatever.
That's the hardest part. Yeah, I'm like, I can't. And that's just another thing to put in the video. I have to edit the video and to do this, and it's like
Yeah, but what I'm not going to do is unsubscribe from your channel.
You're
Again,
sweet, man.
If you are watching this or listening to it, you owe it to yourself. If you're even remotely interested in it, this guy, one of the best in the business, I strongly encourage you to check out John Audio, and we'll have the links in our show notes and in the description. John, thank you so much for letting me just kind of pick your brain about all things synthesis. It's not as big and scary as maybe you think it is. And if you want to learn more, then go subscribe to John and get some of his sample packs. He's just, a working schmo, just like me and just like just you, right?
So, gotta eat tonight. Right.
So toss a coin to your synth programmer.
Yeah, and it's I get this quite often. When we go through courses, I know it's like, hey, I'm John, we just technical stuff. It's like, you can slow the video down. I know I talk fast. I've gotten that a lot. So I'm sure everyone's thinking that this guy just freaking rambles. I'm like, I know, I try to slow down. But
you can also back it up. You can back it up. You can pause it.
There you go. Back it up. Back it up.
Well, John, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, man. This is really awesome.
Once again, a huge word of thanks to John for joining me on the podcast today. And of course, we're going to have his links in the description, so please be sure to check those out. And also, on February 26th at 4 p.m. Eastern, for our family and friends subscribers, John's going to be joining us for a live workshop where he's going to be showing us how to create tension patches from scratch using the free Vital software synth. So you definitely want to join us again for our friends and family subscribers, February 26th at 4 p.m. Eastern. John's going to be joining us, and we would love to have you. Why don't you join us? But that is going to do it for me today. Again, a huge word of thanks to the family, friends, and neighbor subscribers of 52Qs who pay their actual real-life money to keep all of this happening. You'll notice we didn't have any embedded ads for meal plans or plugins or earbuds or anything like that. And the reason that is because we are supported by you. So if that's something that you want to help out with, subscriptions start at around $4 a month, and plus you get all of the perks I mentioned earlier. Then head over to 52qs.com and join us. And you definitely want to join us next week, where we are having our first Ready for Sync Live. That is going to be next Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern, live right here on YouTube. I will be reviewing your cues live. So if you want to have your cue reviewed, then head over to 52qs.com and submit your cue in the Ready for Sync Live event there. But that is going to do it for me. Again, thank you for joining me. I hope you had a good week 6, and it is week 6. I got confused at the beginning. I hope you had a good week 6, and I know that you're going to have an amazing week 7 of 2024. How do I know that, friends? Because I know, trust, and believe that the universe has amazing plans just for you. Until next time, peace. The 52Qs podcast is copyright 2024 818 Studios, all rights reserved. The music played on the podcast is copyright of their respective owners and is used with permission and for educational purposes only. For more information, including joining the community or becoming a member subscriber of 52Qs, head over to 52qs.com.